This rather impressive title was personally given by the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Edgar Hoover, to John Herbert Dillinger, the criminal considered the most reckless, bloodthirsty, cruel, cleverest, quickest, and uncatchable in American history in the first half of the 20th century. The years 1933 and 1934 are considered among the darkest years of the Great Depression in America. The country's economy was in a severe crisis, especially the banking sector. Banks have too many bad debts and bad relationships with customers. Many banks have declared bankruptcy during this time, stealing valuable savings from hardworking people. Some other banks are always at risk of bankruptcy because of bad debts from businesses, factories, farms, etc. Banks' business, already struggling due to the economic downturn, was made worse by the daring robberies. During that time, bank robbers were viewed in different ways. Banks themselves and the majority of low-income people considered them the most dangerous criminals. But for a small group of businesses, companies, etc. that were debtors of the banks, they were considered Robin Hoods of the Depression when they destroyed all their mortgage records at the bank during the crime. Bank robberies have been happening continuously throughout the country, becoming more and more daring with sophisticated and clever tricks of the criminals. And especially, they have attracted the attention of the people because the robbers are handsome and have extremely polite appearances. The most famous bank robberies in the years 1933 to 1934 in America are associated with the name of John Herbert Dillinger, considered the most famous robber in America. Names like John Herbert Dillinger, Harry Pierpont, Babyface Nelson, and the rest of Dillinger's gang were really famous. Their daring robberies were of particular interest to the American people who were tired of the recession. The daily robberies were like popular TV series being shown. John Herbert Dillinger was born on June 22, 1903 in Indianapolis, USA, the leader of the famous Dillinger gang, specializing in robbing large banks. His gang robbed at least 20 banks and 4 police stations. John Dillinger was also charged with murder, but was not convicted when the police thought he was involved in the death of an Indian police officer on the east side of Chicago during a prison break. John Dillinger was arrested but successfully escaped from prison twice. During the time that Dillinger's gang was active, the U.S. government asked the states to assist each other in the process of capturing Dillinger and his gang. Police officer John Edgar Hoover developed the State Bureau of Investigation into the Federal Bureau of Investigation, forerunner of the FBI, with the purpose of fighting organized crime. The capture of John Dillinger and the destruction of his Dillinger gang is considered the foundational campaign for the later Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. One of his escapes took place while he was being held at Crown Point Prison, which was nicknamed the Prison of the Dead. This escape, considered one of the most incredible in history, was accomplished by John Dillinger using a fake gun made of wood and shoe polish. The media later, when talking about Dillinger, also praised him with exaggerated words about his recklessness and audacity in each robbery, as well as in his 2 prison breaks. During a year, after escaping the police of 4 states, John Dillinger was wounded and returned to his father's home in Indianapolis to recover. He returned to Chicago in July 1934 and took refuge there. His activities upon his return to the United States did not escape the surveillance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On July 22, 1934, the federal police arrested him at the Biograph Theater. With a gun, he tried to escape but failed and was shot dead on the spot by 4 bullets. In today's video, we will uncover the mysteries of the legendary bandit John Dillinger's path to fame. As a child, Johnny Dillinger was a bad boy, a troublemaker. As he grew older, Johnny's misdeeds became more serious. Born on June 22, 1903 in downtown Indianapolis, USA, Johnny's father was a gentleman who specialized in serving church work, so he always taught his son to follow moral standards. But that did not have much impact on Johnny as he was extremely playful. Johnny's mother died when Johnny was 3 years old. His 16-year-old sister Audrey became the eldest woman in the family, taking care of everything, and not long after that Audrey got married. When Johnny was 9, his father married a woman named Elizabeth Fields. Young Johnny was always jealous of the affection his father had for this second wife. Lacking the care and guidance of his mother and sister, Johnny quickly became the leader of the neighborhood kids. Johnny named his gang the Dirty Dozen, and the 12 kids began stealing coal from coal trucks as they passed through town. The gang was arrested and taken to court. In court, Johnny was the only boy in the gang who showed no fear. Johnny stood in court with his arms crossed, his cap covering most of his eyes, staring at the judges, chewing gum. When the judge asked Johnny to take off his cap and stop chewing gum, Johnny immediately spit out the gum and stuck it on his cap. Fred Brewer was Johnny's best friend as a child, and the two were very close and loyal to each other. Johnny's father increasingly controlled his son, but the punishments and beatings only made Johnny more stubborn and rebellious. One afternoon, Johnny and his gang captured a young girl, locked her in an old hut, and took turns raping her. Johnny was only 13 at the time. Johnny left school at 16, despite his father's objections, and then worked in a lumberyard, then as a mechanic, but quit shortly afterwards. Johnny's father decided to move to rural Mooresville, the hometown of his second wife, Elizabeth Fields. There, Johnny continued to attend school, with no subject of interest except biology. Shortly before Christmas break, Johnny dropped out of school again. Johnny's father was furious and kicked Johnny out of the house. Living alone in Martinsville, Johnny was truly free and began to take an interest in girls. Johnny fell in love with his uncle's adopted niece Frances Thornton, and was willing to give up his wild life to marry her, which was strongly opposed by his uncle. The two separated, which greatly influenced Johnny's attitude towards women later on. Johnny loved the Wild West with its stories about the hero Jesse James. Jesse had the qualities of Robin Hood that Johnny admired: bold, strong, and really gallant with women and children. Johnny respected women and was always straightforward in his relationships with them. But a rejection in Martinsville changed Johnny. Johnny returned to Indianapolis and had relationships with many prostitutes. Johnny later contracted gonorrhea from these relationships. Johnny's relationship with his father worsened. One day after an argument, Johnny left home in a stolen car nearby. Knowing he could not return, Johnny left for another city and joined the U.S. Navy. But Johnny's military career lasted only 5 months when Johnny jumped ship and escaped to Mooresville. 1924 was a pivotal year for Johnny with a series of events. Johnny got married, became a thief of 41 chickens, became a local baseball star, became a robber, and was sent to a camp. Johnny's wife was Hovia's Barrel, 16 years old. One Saturday night in early September 1924, Johnny, armed with a pistol, broke into a local grocery store with a friend named Singleton, who was Johnny's first criminal partner. After that incident, Johnny was sent to the Pendleton Reformatory at the age of 24. With a very confident attitude, Johnny told the director of the camp, "I will not cause any trouble here except to escape." To prove his point, less than a month after entering the camp, Johnny tried to escape, but failed and was sentenced to another 6 months. He also failed a second time when he tried to escape on the way to Pendleton. And less than a week later, Johnny failed again when he tried to escape a third time. From 1925 to 1931, Johnny was punished many times for violating the camp's rules, such as gambling, fighting, destroying camp property, trying to escape. All of Johnny's unsuccessful escapes gave him experience. During his long stay at the camp, Johnny met Harry Pierpont, who later became his good friend and had the strongest influence on Johnny's life later on. Harry Pierpont was a handsome young man with blue eyes, sandy hair, soft-spoken, and very charming in relationships with the opposite sex, very similar to Johnny. Harry was put in the camp a year before Johnny because I stole a car and injured the owner, then used the car to rob a bank in Kokomo. It was also here that Johnny met Homer Van Meter. Homer Van Meter was a very mischievous person who played tricks in the camp. With his tall and slim figure, he attracted Johnny's attention. Homer Van Meter was arrested and sent to the camp when he generously gave a stranger on the bus a large sum of money he had just robbed. During his long time in the camp, although he had 2 friends, Harry Pierpont and Homer Van Meter, Johnny always thought about his young wife Beryl. He spent a lot of time writing tearful letters promising to return home. But for a young girl like Beryl, the wait was difficult. In 1929, Beryl filed for divorce and it was granted in absentia. This really depressed Johnny. He became withdrawn, and after that he participated in camp activities and quickly became famous. In late 1929, during a baseball game between the campers and the local baseball club, Johnny caught the attention of Harry Leslie, governor of Indiana, who was also a member of the club. Shortly thereafter, Johnny received an order for release from the governor. However, Johnny refused to be released and requested to be transferred to the notoriously harsh Michigan City Penitentiary. He wanted to be with Harry Pierpont and Van Meter, who had been transferred there not long before, and the governor agreed. While in the camp, Johnny was recruited by Harry Pierpont into his gang of bank robbers, the ringleaders of which were now serving time in the camp. He was taught the most effective tricks by Walter Dietrich, Pierpont's teacher. Walter Dietrich had been a close friend of Herman Lamb, a notorious robber and former German officer. In a short time, Johnny had learned the theoretical tricks by heart. The ringleaders were Fat Charles Mackley, 44, the most cunning and notorious robber in Ohio; John Red Hamilton, a 34-year-old rogue; Russell Clark, a cold-blooded young man; and Dietrich. The whole gang is always trying to escape because their rehabilitation period is too long. Fat Charles Mackley, the oldest, came up with a plan to bribe the camp staff to escape, and what was needed for this plan was a large sum of money, a few pistols, and a safe place to hide afterwards. Knowing that Johnny was about to be released on bail, Harry Pierpont discussed a plan with Johnny and made a deal that if Johnny could help them escape, he would be a driver for the gang plus a huge sum of money. Johnny became a key figure in the gang's escape plan. Harry Pierpont provided him with the names of their outside associates so that Johnny could cooperate in a series of banks where he could potentially rob a lot, starting a business right after getting out of prison. On May 22, 1933, after 4 years in a Michigan prison, Johnny was released on parole when his family announced the death of his stepmother, Elizabeth Fields. Johnny left the Michigan prison. After his stepmother's funeral at the church, Johnny expressed to his father that he wanted to become a law-abiding citizen. But just a few weeks later, Johnny found 2 names on the list Pierpont provided while in the camp: William Shaw and Paul Parker. He said his name was Dan Dillinger. William Shaw and another guy named Noble Claycomb were the leaders of the White Cap Gang, specializing in robbing stores, supermarkets. The first place Johnny robbed was a supermarket. All they stole was $100. The small sum did not satisfy Johnny. He wanted to break into something more spectacular and took the initiative in planning the robbery for Shaw and Claycomb. They got off to a lucky start when they attacked the New Carlisle branch of the State Bank of New Carlisle, making off with $10,000. Next was a drug store. The amount of money stolen was nearly $4,000. After a few missions, Johnny lost his appreciation of Claycomb and Shaw's abilities. Once they were captured, Johnny contacted the other men on Pierpont's list. On July 17th, Johnny and his new accomplice Harry Copeland broke into a small bank in the town of Daleville, easily overpowered the female employee there, and stole nearly $4,000. Indiana State Sheriff Matt Leach took notice of Johnny after that incident and quickly investigated that Dan Dillinger was Johnny Dillinger. Johnny went to Dayton, the home of a gang member trapped in the camp, to discuss the escape and to be curious about the sister he often mentioned, Mary Longacre. The 23-year-old divorced mother of one made Johnny infatuated at first, and then flirted with her every time he wrote to her about the escape plan. With his flashy appearance and sweet words, Johnny did not attract Mary Longacre's attention. However, because of her brother's escape plan, Mary maintained a good relationship with Johnny and accepted to be his lover. Sheriff Matt Leach quickly learned that Johnny often visited Mary in Dayton. In early September 1933, when Matt Leach learned that Johnny would be arriving in Dayton in a few days, he went there with a colleague and rented a house across the street from where Johnny frequented. Meanwhile, Dillinger and Harry Copeland continued to commit bank robberies in Ohio and Indiana to raise enough money for the prisoners to escape. Their most successful robbery was the attack on the Massachusetts branch of the State Bank in Indianapolis on September 6, 1933. The amount of money they stole was up to $25,000. Now Johnny Dillinger had enough money for his accomplice's escape plan. After gathering enough money for the escape plan, Johnny quickly set about the necessary work with the help of Pearl Elliott and Mary Kinder, who were close friends of Pierpont. Pearl Elliott sent letters to Pierpont from prison and passed bribes where they were needed. Mary Kinder found a safe house for future escapees. Johnny bought guns and threw them carefully wrapped inside the prison, near the sports field. Unfortunately for him, another prisoner picked them up and turned them in to the prison warden. Suspecting some of the men, including those involved in Johnny's scheme, the warden arranged for them to be held in solitary confinement. Through Pearl Elliott, Pierpont cleverly instructed Johnny to smuggle the guns into the prison through the workers in the prison clothing factory. Johnny did this well, and the escape plan was scheduled for September 27th. On September 22nd, as promised, Johnny returned to Dayton to visit Mary Longacre. Police officer Matt Leach left Dayton after waiting for days, asking the homeowner to call him if Johnny showed up. As soon as Johnny appeared, with the homeowner's notification, Dayton police quickly raided Mary Longacre's house and arrested Johnny. Johnny was imprisoned in Lima, Ohio, during which time a daring escape plan was prepared. A large box from a prison clothing factory arrived at a Michigan prison. Walter Dietrich, a protege of bank robber Baron Lamb, received 4 pistols and boxes of ammunition in a clothing box that Johnny had arranged. The plan was rescheduled for September 25th, but Pierpont feared the plan would leak out, so they agreed to act on September 26th. But in reality, the new warden, Louis Kunkel, knew nothing about this plan. On the afternoon of September 26th, 10 men gathered in prison uniforms. Mackley, Pierpont, and Hamilton were given guns, while the others used fake guns. A leader used the gun to control the factory director and forced him to lead them out of the prison. As they neared the main gate, Kunkel began to suspect something was wrong. Someone shouted, "Inmate escaped." Pierpont quickly aimed his gun at Kunkel and fired a shot into his stomach. Everyone got out. It was raining heavily. 3 of the men stole a police car and drove straight to Chicago. The remaining men, including Pierpont and Mackley, stole a car at a nearby gas station and drove to Indianapolis. The biggest prison break in Indiana history has just been carried out, along with several others since. The notoriously strict Michigan City prison has a new name, Paper Prison. The escapees made their way to a house prepared by Mary Kinder in Hamilton, Ohio, escaping a blockade by police officer Matt Leach. During the escape, Mary Longacre's brother, Jim Jenkins, was shot dead. Mary Kinder, Pierpont's mistress, rejoins the gang and agrees to act as a dealer for further bank robberies. Mackley directed his gang to rob banks in his hometown of St. Mary's, Ohio. Although these banks had been closed by the Treasury Department and had little money left to reopen them, they were the easiest places to break into. After the robberies here, they stole more than $11,000, more than they needed to attack the Lima prison where Johnny was being held. During his imprisonment in Lima, Johnny wrote to his father and for the first time expressed his thoughts about what he was doing, like playing a game and knowing he would win. At Kima prison, Johnny was treated very well by Sheriff Jess Sarber and his wife. The two lived in the prison together. At Johnny's request, Pierpont brought Evelyn Billy Frechette, a beautiful half-American Indian woman, to visit Johnny in prison to get a good look at the area before they attempted their escape. They spoke to the local attorney about Evelyn Billy Frechette, Johnny's sister, wanting to visit him, and the attorney said he would notify Sheriff Saber the next day. Worried that Officer Sarber would cause trouble, Pierpont decided to break out of the prison that very day. At 6:20 p.m., Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark headed toward the prison, guns in hand. Officer Saber and his wife were having dinner. Pierpont told them, "We are the Michigan City coroner. We want to see Johnny." Saber quickly understood the problem and asked them for some information. Pierpont lost his temper and shot Saber, causing him to stagger. Mackley used his gun to hit Saber again in the head, causing him to collapse. His wife was scared and gave them the key to free Johnny. Sheriff Saber died an hour and a half later. Johnny escaped from prison with his gang. After their successful escape, Johnny and his gang formed a new gang. They returned to Chicago and planned to break into the biggest banks. In their plan, they found that they needed guns, bullets, and bulletproof vests, and the best place to get them was the police armory. A week after escaping from the Lima, Ohio prison, on the evening of October 20th, 1933, Johnny and Pierpont decided to break into the police armory in Peru, Indiana, and get what they wanted. All is ready for the takeover of banks. Authorities were extremely angry at their daring action. Sheriff Matt Leach knew that both Johnny and Pierpont had big egos. Often the gang's robberies were referred to in the press as Pierpont's gang. He asked the press to change the name to Dillinger's gang in order to create internal dissension between Pierpont and Johnny. His suggestion was accepted by the press. However, this does not affect the internal affairs of the gang. Their goal is to succeed in robberies, not to be named in the press. Pierpont was a bold thinker and a bit impulsive at times, so Pierpont encouraged Johnny to take on a leadership role. According to Pierpont, the name Dillinger sounded like Derringer, meaning pistol, and that was a fitting name for their gang. The first target was the Greencastle National Bank in Indiana on October 23rd. Johnny attacked the counter and collected money from the counters, while Pierpont and Mackley controlled everyone. Hamilton stood at the door timing everything so that it would not take more than 5 minutes. A teller after the robbery recounted that Johnny was collecting money at the counters when he saw a farmer standing frozen with a stack of bills and some money in front of him at the counter. Johnny asked the man, "Is it the bank's money or your money?" After hearing the man reply, "Mine," Johnny said, "Keep your money. We only take the bank's money." There were no gunshots in the robbery, and the amount of money they stole was nearly $75,000, a huge sum during the Depression years. Johnny had a penchant for having fun with anyone who wanted to hunt him, including the police. In the summer of 1933, he took Mary Longacre to the Chicago World's Fair, where he willingly posed for photographs with the press despite knowing he was wanted for several robberies. Knowing that police chief Matt Leach had a stutter, he called him several times to taunt him. In November 1933, Johnny was nearly arrested by the police at an eye clinic when he went there for treatment. He was lucky to escape the police. After that incident, the police also had to respect Johnny's driving skills. Not long after, the gang moved to Milwaukee and planned an attack on the Trust Bank in Racine, Wisconsin. On November 20th, 1933, Henry Pierpont entered the bank and pasted a large Red Cross poster on the large window to prevent outsiders from seeing into the teller counter. Then Johnny, Mackley, and Hamilton began to break in. The police suddenly arrived. Mackey fired a warning shot at Sergeant Hansen of the investigation department, but did not affect Hansen's life. Everyone panicked. They quickly grabbed a woman and the bank president as hostages, dragged them into the car, and escaped. Not long after, both of these people were released safely. 5 days later, they robbed another bank in Racine, Wisconsin, and made off with $27,000. After more than a month in Chicago, they headed down to Daytona, Florida, to celebrate Christmas and New Year's. Before leaving, police received a tip that one of their cars was being repaired at a local garage. When Red Hamilton and his girlfriend went to pick up the car, they clashed with police. Hamilton shot and seriously wounded a Chicago police sergeant. The Chicago Police Department decided to form a special team, the Dillinger Squad, to monitor the gang, headed by Captain John Steege. After New Year's, Pierpont decided to move to Tucson, Arizona. Police across the Midwest are still searching for them. Johnny returned to Chicago to deal with some personal matters, with Hamilton accompanying him. On the way, on January 15, 1934, the two robbed the First National Bank in Gary, Indiana. The rash plan left Hamilton wounded, and Johnny Dillinger shot and killed police officer William Patrick O'Malley during the escape. The rest of the gang were quickly arrested when they moved to Tucson. On January 23rd, the hotel where Mackley and Clark were staying caught on fire, and a firefighter recognized Clark and notified the police. Johnny, an accomplice named Billy, along with Pierpont and his girlfriend Mary Kinder, arrived a day later but were not able to escape, and in a 5-hour raid, the police captured the 4 men. The Tucson police had done what police across the Midwest had not been able to do in 4 months. The states were fighting over the gang. Ohio wanted Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark for killing Officer Saber while rescuing Johnny. Indiana wanted Johnny for killing Officer O'Malley, and Wisconsin wanted them all for the Racine bank raids. The gang wanted extradition to Wisconsin, where they would not be tried for murder. Sheriff Matt Leach shows up in Tucson with evidence that Johnny killed Officer O'Malley. Johnny is taken to a special vehicle and taken to the Tucson airport for a flight to Chicago. The remaining members, Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark, were extradited by train to Ohio, where they were to stand trial for the murder of Sheriff Jess Sarber. When he arrived at Midway Airport, Chicago, the entire Dillinger squad of the Chicago Police Department directly escorted him closely. Johnny was taken to the Lake County Sheriff Lillian Holly office. Reporters had long surrounded the office, hunting Johnny down as a celebrity. This made Johnny think he was better than everyone else and always smiled smugly. In a photo taken with Johnny, Sheriff Lillian Holly and Indiana State Attorney Robert Estill, the reporter accidentally asked Robert Estill to put his arm around Johnny's back while he placed his elbow on Robert Estill's shoulder, showing that he was on par with the politician. The photo was quickly broadcast in all newspapers, newsreels. This caused prosecutor Robert Estill to lose the opportunity to become governor of Indiana later. Ignoring the criticism from the press, Estill quickly completed the case against Johnny. On February 9, 1934, the trial was scheduled to be held in public, and the National Guard was mobilized to attend the trial of this popular criminal. Judge William Murray was assigned to hear the case, but for some reason, the trial was postponed for more than a month and is scheduled to resume on March 12th. While waiting for the trial to resume, Prosecutor Estill requested that Johnny be transferred to a Chicago prison because the prison system there was guaranteed to hold escaped criminals. But Judge Murray refused this request, not allowing Johnny to be transferred from Crown Point Prison. And that was a wrong decision that Judge Murray would regret forever after. During his time in prison, Johnny planned his next escape in detail. Crown Point Prison was once as notorious as any prison in Michigan. Even the legendary escapee Houdini couldn't escape from this prison. But Johnny did. At 9 a.m. on March 3rd, Johnny subdued several police officers with a wooden gun and a layer of shoe polish. Johnny, after escaping from his cell, asked the prisoner in the cell next to him if he wanted to escape with him. Herbert Youngblood, a black criminal awaiting trial for murder, and two other criminals agreed to follow Johnny. They quickly headed toward the garage. While Youngblood and the other two held the police at gunpoint, Johnny quickly searched for a car to escape. He asked the parking attendant Edward Sauger to find him the best car, which was the sheriff's car. Johnny, Youngblood, and his gang overpowered a policeman named Blunk and Sauger into the car and quickly drove away. The most famous criminal to escape from Crown Point Prison without anyone being shot. After leaving the city, Johnny asked Blunk to stop the car. He gave Sauger $4 so Sauger and Blunk could catch a car back. Johnny did not forget to apologize for not having more money. Before driving away, Johnny turned back the way he had come, smiled and said, "I'll definitely be back for Christmas." But Johnny didn't make it. During that escape, Johnny made a big mistake. By driving the car he stole from Sheriff Lillian Holly's across states. From Indiana to Illinois, he violated federal law. Therefore, the FBI noticed him. Edgar Hoover's an FBI agent joined in the hunt for Johnny. In Chicago at the time, Police Chief John Stage disbanded the Dillinger Squad. After Johnny escaped from Crown Point Prison, Judge Murray urgently appointed a grand jury to investigate the escape. He admitted that his biggest mistake was opposing Johnny's transfer from Crown Point Prison to Michigan City Prison. There were theories surrounding Johnny's sudden escape that suggested help from members of the Justice Department itself. Police Officer Blunk was also implicated. In an interview with the press, a reporter bluntly asked Judge Murray to explain why a famous prosecutor like Robert Estill could embrace a criminal like Johnny. As for Johnny, after escaping and returning to Chicago, he quickly planned to select promising and suitable juniors to create a new gang. Johnny needed quick men. John Hamilton, or Red Hamilton, a gang rascal he had met in a Michigan prison, was at the top of his list. Next came Lester Gillis, a notorious robber known as Nelson Baby. Nelson was a member of the infamous Capone gang. Then came Homer Van Meter, Johnny's friend from his time at Pendleton Reformatory and Michigan State Prison. Also joining Van Meter were Eddie Green, a veteran bank robber, and Tommy Carroll, a skilled gunman. Johnny's gang moved to Twin Cities, Minnesota, preparing for another takeover. Eddie Green always had a good idea of the banks his gang was targeting. Their first target was the Security National Bank in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It was a famous robbery. While Johnny and a few others robbed the bank, Tommy Carroll kept watch outside. With just a gun, Tommy Carroll handled the entire Sioux Falls police force that participated in the arrest, including the police chief. People stood on both sides of the street watching the robbery, They thought it was a scene from a movie. The raid netted the gang $49,000. This was the first robbery in which Johnny Dillinger was the ringleader. But to the leaders of Sioux Falls, they did not believe that Johnny was the ringleader. After receiving a large sum of money from the robbery, Johnny called his lawyer, Louis Piquet, and asked him to use the money to pay the lawyers of Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark on behalf of their families. The person who stood up to receive this money was Mary Kinder. Receiving a large sum of money from lawyer Louis Piquet, Mary had no idea that the money belonged to Johnny, nor did she know where Johnny was. In March 1934, Harry Pierpont went on trial for the murder of Sheriff Jess Sarber in Lima, Ohio. The courtroom was heavily guarded with National Guard troops because it was rumored that Johnny and Hamilton were on their way to rescue their accomplices. Pierpont was brought into the courtroom in large chains, accompanied by several armed police officers. Pierpont's mother testified in court that her son was home with her at the time of the murder, but the evidence was not convincing. The death penalty was recommended for Harry Pierpont at his trial. After several trials, Pierpont and Mackley were sentenced to death by electric chair in Ohio, while Clark received a life sentence. Back with Johnny's gang in the Twin Cities, Eddie Green continued to plan an attack on the First National Bank in Mason. However, the robbery was unsuccessful because of the tight security at the bank. Johnny and Hamilton were shot in the shoulder, and Nelson accidentally shot and wounded an innocent person. With the Mason robberies continuing to go wrong, Johnny knew his luck would not last long. He did not want to meet the same fate as Pierpont, Mackley, and Clark. They were being held in Fort Knox, the most secure prison in the country, which meant Johnny could not save them. Johnny quickly made plans to gather enough money to escape overseas. On March 31, 1934, FBI agents responded to a tip from an anonymous man that a man named Carl Hellman resembling Johnny was living with a woman in the suburbs. It was the house where Johnny and his lover Billy Frechette lived. Several members of the gang frequented the house. Billy Frechette met with the FBI agents, telling them that her husband Carl Hellman was asleep, and quickly alerted Johnny. He rushed out of bed with a gun. Van Meter appeared, surprised, and confessed that he was a delivery man. The FBI agents were immediately suspicious and asked him to be taken to the car for inspection. After a few minutes of confusion, Van Meter pulled out a gun and fired back into the house, trying to escape through the back door. By then, Johnny was ready to flee. Billy Frechette escaped first with a suitcase, followed by Johnny. The two jumped into a waiting car and sped away. During the escape, Johnny was shot in the leg, the wound in his shoulder still not healed. Van Meter also stole a truck. Both cars sped to Eddie Green's apartment in Minneapolis. To avoid police surveillance, Johnny and Billy Frechette left Minneapolis the next day. Eddie Green remained at the house, and the police and FBI agents soon arrived. A confrontation ensued. Eddie Green was severely injured. A week later, he died in agony from an infection. At one point, in exchange for painkillers, Eddie Green had to trade the names of several gang members. On April 5th, Johnny surprised his father by showing up at the Mooresville farm with Billy Frechette. The couple then visited Pierpont's parents, but the Pierpont farm was completely deserted. On April 8th, Johnny and Billy Frechette attended a family party under secret surveillance by FBI agents. During his time back home, Johnny sought out Van Meter's contacts to continue planning new robberies. On April 12th, they broke into the Warsaw, Indiana police station and took 2 pistols and 4 bulletproof vests. During the week of April 13th to April 20th, the Dillinger gang made appearances in many places, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, South Bend, Elkhart and Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Niles, Michigan. Then they left Chicago in 3 cars, heading to northern Wisconsin. During that escape, Hamilton, a key member of the gang, was seriously injured. Hamilton died a few days later. There are many theories about Hamilton's death. According to a reliable source, in late April, after burying Hamilton, Johnny and Van Meter returned to Chicago in a red truck. During their return, they recruited Tommy Carroll into their gang. They lived temporarily in the van for a few weeks until Johnny's personal attorney, Piquet, found a safe house. Having difficulty evading the police to avoid detection, Johnny thought of plastic surgery. A good German doctor named Wilhelm Loser, who had served a 3-year prison sentence for drug-related crimes, was personally selected by lawyer Paquette to do this job. The assistant for the surgery was Dr. Harold Bernard Cassidy. Johnny agreed to pay a whopping $5,000 for the surgery. Harold Cassidy would receive $600, and the rest would be split equally between Loser, Paquette, and O'Leary, a close associate of Johnny's who directly assisted Paquette. The surgery removed 3 moles on his forehead, erased a scar on his lip, reduced his chin, and reshaped his nose. Johnny was very pleased with the operation that almost cost him his life. He then dyed his hair black, began growing a mustache, and wore glasses. On June 7th, police announced the death of Tommy Carroll, a new member of the gang. This saddened Johnny and Van Meter. They sensed something was wrong. On June 30th, the remaining members of the Dillinger gang continued their actions. Their target was the South National Bank in Bend, Indiana. This was the last and bloodiest mission in the lives of Johnny and his gang. Nelson fatally wounded 2 passersby during a shootout with police. The bank guard was slashed in the throat by Van Meter as he tried to escape. Van Meter himself was fatally shot. Johnny and the others left the bank safely with the hostage. The gang was lucky to escape and ran to a house outside the city. The amount of money stolen in this case was $4,800. Van Meter was accidentally shot in the forehead, but survived but was seriously injured. A veterinarian had to treat him before Dr. Cassidy arrived. After recovering from their injuries, on July 4th, Johnny and Van Meter quietly left the house without notifying attorney Paquette. Johnny Dillinger's wanted posters were posted in many states, with a reward of up to $15,000. While recovering from his $5,000 cosmetic surgery, Johnny was confident in his new look, no longer worried about being pursued by the police, and began to venture out in public. Johnny played baseball at Wrigley Field, attended Chicago fairs, went to movies and nightclubs, and even became involved with a number of prostitutes, one of whom was Anna Sage, the woman with the alluring name of the Lady in the Red Dress. Anna Sage was born in 1889 in a small village in Romania. After marrying, she moved to the United States in 1909, settling in the Slovenian neighborhood on the east side of Chicago, Indiana. 2 years later, Sage divorced her husband and began working as a prostitute, running a large brothel called Bill Subotics. In 1923, Sage opened a second business called the Hotel Coster in Gary, Indiana, and became famous in the black entertainment scene. Johnny was attracted to Anna Sage and often visited her apartment as his own. In Anna Sage's house, there was a chair reserved for Johnny whenever he came here to relax. So when he was wanted, and in the last days before being taken down by the police, Johnny still visited Sage. During her time in Chicago on business, Anna Sage became acquainted with and often hung out with Martin Zarkovich, a police officer at the East Side Chicago Police Department. This special relationship helped Sage a lot in her business. It was this couple, Anna Sage and Martin Zarkovich, who played an important role in the downfall of John Dillinger. The Lady in the Red Dress. Anna Sage is an illegal immigrant to the U.S. and is at risk of being deported because of low moral character. Sage tries every way to save herself, and Johnny will be the tool for Sage to achieve her goal. On July 21st, Anna Sage contacted the Chicago Police Department. She negotiated with the police that she would provide some important information about Johnny if the police department would assist her with her immigration. The police department agreed. According to the betrayer, Johnny was going to meet Polly Hamilton, a well-known prostitute in the black entertainment industry, on July 22nd. The couple would go to the movies at either the Biograph or Marlboro theaters. Anna Sage would accompany him and wear an orange dress to make them easily recognizable to the police. Immediately, a special team consisting of FBI members and Chicago police was formed, including Sergeant Martin Zarkovich. The special team divided into 2 groups to ambush the 2 theaters above. True to Sage's word, Johnny was at the Biograph Theater with her and Polly Hamilton. Once the target was identified, Sheriff Samuel P. Cowley informed the entire group to be ready to take down Johnny, and even shoot him if the robber acted rashly. After 10 o'clock, Johnny left the theater. With the sharpness of an experienced robber, Johnny realized the presence of the police around him. He immediately ran into a side alley. The police followed Johnny and opened fire. John Dillinger was shot down in an alley outside the Biograph Theater. It was 10:40 a.m. on Sunday, July 22, 1934, and police were shooting Johnny from several directions. 4 bullets hit Johnny, 2 grazed his face, a third hit the back of his neck, and a 4th hit his left collarbone. He collapsed in a pool of blood. Johnny was taken to Election Brothers Hospital and laid out on the grass until the FBI Deputy Director of Investigation arrived. Johnny was officially pronounced dead, and police and hospital staff transported the body to the Cook County morgue. A crowd of reporters and residents were waiting to get a glimpse of the notorious criminal. The police found more than $7 in Johnny's pocket. It is assumed that several people took advantage of the situation to steal Johnny's money. A pocket watch was also found with a photograph of a young woman inside. Some speculated it was Mary Longacre, Johnny's girlfriend from Dayton. Others said it was Billy Frechette. The press said it was Polly Hamilton. At the morgue, it was crowded with doctors, nurses, interns, policemen. Most of them were curious people. Chicago authorities decided to open the morgue so people could visit Johnny. All kinds of people, from politicians, officials, businessmen to housewives, students. An estimated 15,000 people lined up to see Johnny's body before it was transferred to McCready Funeral Home. Chicago police escorted Johnny's body to the Indiana border. Johnny's father and half-brother Audrey Dillinger Hancock were also present at the funeral home. Audrey Dillinger Hancock did not believe the body was her legendary brother. After examining the scar on the body's right thigh, Audrey confirmed that it was John Dillinger. Johnny is buried at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. This cemetery is the final resting place of the 23rd President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison. Johnny's headstone has been replaced many times by visitors and curious citizens who want a piece of the most notorious criminal as a souvenir.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.